Where did the idea for the 1988 hit film Beetlejuice come from? What does Beetlejuice even mean? What were some of the names considered for this movie before the director and the studio settled on Beetlejuice? These and more questions will be answered on this episode of
Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
Oh, well, I attended Juilliard. I'm a graduate of the Harvard Business School. I travel quite extensively. I've lived through the Black Plague and had a pretty good time doing that. I've seen The Exorcist about 167 times, and it keeps getting funnier every time I see it, not to mention that you're talking to a dead guy. Now, what do you think? You think I'm qualified? Hi, my name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z-O for those of you living outside of the U.S. Welcome back to this, the 197th episode of Back Look Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then tell your family, tell your friends, and tell the leading bio-exorcist, who's also known as the ghost with the most, about Back Look Cinema. When you look into the night sky, you might see three bright stars fairly close together in a relatively straight line. I call them bright because it's one of the few star formations that can be seen while living near a city. These stars are the most recognizable star formations in the night sky. They form Orion's belt, and when you zoom out a little bit, you might notice Orion's belt is sort of boxed in by four bright stars. This is the larger portion of the constellation of Orion. The bright red star that occupies the upper left corner of the square that boxes in Orion's belt may either be considered Orion's right shoulder or his right armpit. If you look at this star as Orion's right armpit, that might be a clue to why this star is called Beetlejuice. It's spelled B-E-T-E-L-G-E-U-S-E. But in the movie Beetlejuice, they sometimes use an alternate spelling that just smashes the words beetle and juice together. No matter which spelling is used, the pronunciation is the same. Beetlejuice is a strange name, and its etymology is fascinating because I always thought it was a German word, but actually it is a French transliteration of an Arabic name. The Arabic name for Orion is Al-Jawza, and the star had been called Bit Al-Jawza. Do you hear it? Beetlejuice. Bit Al-Jawza. Beetlejuice. Bit Al-Jawza. They almost sound the same. We don't know the exact translation, but as near as we can tell, Al-Jawza has been interpreted as the central one or the giant one. The bit in Bit Al-Jawza had been interpreted as armpit. So Bit Al-Jawza, if this translation is correct, means the armpit of the giant one. Although Bit Al-Jawza could be a mistranslation of Yad Al-Jawza, which means the hand of the giant one, which admittedly is less fun, but probably makes more sense. The star Beetlejuice, from which the star of the movie Beetlejuice gets his name, is a red supergiant. It's 20 times more massive than our sun. It's 650 light years away, and it's acting kind of funny. Scientists think that it might go supernova between now and 1,000,000 years from now. Kind of like how the movie Beetlejuice shone bright like a supernova when it was released in 1988. And now that you have more information than you ever really needed for the word and the name Beetlejuice, let's talk about the movie Beetlejuice 1988 in the opening credits. The newly dead Maitlands have a problem. Their problem is that they're polite, considerate, and entirely too nice. Since they've been dead, they've had the luxury of having their home to themselves. for a little while. But then some people bought the house and moved in. Adam and Barbara Maitland would like nothing more than to get rid of them, but scaring people out of their home is a much more difficult thing for a ghost to do than they realize. As they become ever more desperate to rid themselves of these pests, they've been tempted to use the services of a professional of dubious character. This strange ghost guarantees that he could rid their home of living people for once and for all. But the Maitlands are not sure of his methods. If they ever change their minds, all they have to do is call out his name 3 times. Beetlejuice was released March 30th, 1988, produced by the Geffen Company. It grossed over $74 million in the U.S. and Canada on a reported budget of $15 million. And that is excellent. If you adjust it for inflation, that means that if it were released today, then the movie would have grossed over $202 million on a $41 million budget. And it's amazing that it took so long for the sequel to be made. Not that they didn't try. They actually went through several attempts to put out a sequel for this movie, but nothing ever came together. I think the closest that they came was a movie that they were going to call Beetlejuice in Hawaii, but like nothing ever gelled. So only in the past couple of years did they ever actually produce a sequel. And I think there's talk of them doing a 3rd movie. But going back to this movie, it was starring Alec Baldwin. He plays Adam Maitland, and you may have seen him in Glengarry Glen Ross, The Departed, The Shadow, The Hunt for Red October. We covered that all the way back in episode 2, and Ghosts of Mississippi. Geena Davis plays Barbara Maitland, and you may have seen her in Thelma and Louise, The Good Kiss Goodnight. We covered that back in episode 19. The Fly, that we covered in episode 49. Stuart Little, which I've seen and thought was quite charming, and a movie that I had not seen, Earth Girls Are Easy. It's the only movie in the list of movies that I have for her that I had not seen. And now I'm even more curious about it. Michael Keaton plays Beetlejuice. You may have seen him in a movie called Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, which I've always wanted to see, never got around to it. He's also been in The Founder, Spider-Man Homecoming, The Other Guys, which he was quite charming in, and a movie that he's now the most famous for, Batman, that we covered back in episode 23. Also in this movie was Winona Ryder. She plays Lydia Dietz. She's been in Alien Resurrection. We covered that in episode 124 with Rod and Karen from The Black Guy Who Tips. She was also in Dracula 1992, Mermaids, and Black Swan. Catherine O'Hara played Delia Dietz, and you might have seen her in A Mighty Wind, Best in Show, or heard her in Frankenweenie, or seen her in A Series of Unfortunate Events from 2004. Jeffrey Jones, who we know as a bad person who has been in a lot of movies, plays Charles Dietz. And we've seen him in Amadeus that we covered in episode 146 with Derek McDuff from Underrated. And he's also been in Howard the Duck. Glenn Shaddix plays Ortho, and you may have heard him in The Nightmare Before Christmas, or seen him in, well, actually, I don't know if he was actually in costume. He probably was. You may have seen him in Planet of the Apes under heavy ape makeup, and that's the 2001 movie. Or you might have recognized him from Demolition Man, and we covered that in episode 41 with Donnell and Robert from Watching It Podcast. Robert Goulet plays Maxie Dean, and you may have seen him in The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear, or Scrooged, or the dozens of movies where he played himself. This movie was directed by Tim Burton, and he has directed a lot of classic movies, including Edward Scissorhands, Frankenweenie, Dumbo, Big Eyes, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Corpse Bride, or Big Fish. It was written by Michael McDowell, Laurie Wilson, and Warren Scarron. Interestingly, between the three of them, they have not written a whole bunch of movies. They've written a few TV shows and maybe some videos and some various other projects, but not a whole bunch of movies. But the movies that they did write or had a hand in writing were very accomplished movies. For example, McDowell has written The Nightmare Before Christmas and Thinner. Wilson had a hand in writing The Addams Family and The Little Vampire 3D. And Scarron is credited for Batman and Beverly Hills Cop 2. The composer was by, you guessed it, Danny Elfman, because when you see Tim Burton's name, Danny Elfman's name is rarely far behind, and he has a fantastic reservoir of music for which he has contributed to movies. So we have movies like Men in Black, Dead Man's Wire, Dracula, A Love Tale, Bloody Bridget, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, The Grinch, and 50 Shades of Grey. And of course, we can't continue to talk about the music without mentioning the soundtrack. And there are two main songs that kind of jump out at me when I watch this movie. And I think the first song that jumps out at everyone is Day-O, the Banana Song, or the Banana Boat Song, with lyrics by William A. Attaway and Irving Bergey, performed by Harry Belafonte. And when I dug into this song, I've heard this song like most of my life without ever knowing what it was about. Just a fun song to sing along. It's a call and response song. It's a traditional Jamaican call and response folk song. The song creates an image of dock workers at night. They're on a night shift and they're loading bananas onto the ships or onto the boats. And daytime is coming. They're on a night shift. Daytime is coming and it's time to go home. The song is self-explanatory. It's like when I used to sing along to it, I'm not thinking about the lyrics, but when you think about the lyrics a little bit, the song kind of explains itself. Day-O, daylight come and me want to go home. It's daytime and it's time to go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me bananas. Come over here and count these bananas so I can go home. So I love that. The other song that jumped out at me was Jump in the Line, Shake Senora, music by Rafael de Leon, Gabriel Oller, and Steve Samuel. The English lyrics were by Stephen Somville, and another great performance by Harry Belafonte. And that was a song at the end of the movie where everybody's sort of getting along and dancing and celebrating, and it was a fitting in to the movie. As far as announcements go, I don't have much except for the same old usual stuff. Please check out the shop at backlickcinema.com/shop. And we're still in preparedness and anticipation for the eBay shop, Bazaar de Alonso. And now that we got that out the way, let's talk about our favorite parts. So the theme of this movie should be something like, there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed. It's more like, when somebody tells you this is dangerous, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't cross that line. Maybe don't go over there. Maybe don't talk to that person. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe there are some options that you shouldn't consider. And that's what, that's what seems to be, one of the themes that's kind of percolating throughout this film. That's kind of like, this movie doesn't exist unless the people actually cross that line, right? And that's where we get the adventures and the screams and the running and so on and so forth. And I think the other one is, sometimes you just gotta learn to live together. I hadn't seen Beetlejuice in a long time. I know I've watched it a few times back when it first came out. Watched it in the theater and then watched it, at home on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever, a few times. But on those times that I watched it, there are certain things that I missed. And when I watched it this time, I found a new appreciation for it. Like, one of the things I realized when I watched it this time was just how important Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis and their characters were to this movie. I feel like they were the most important parts of this movie. They made the movie most enjoyable. Obviously, Beetlejuice is the star, but you don't see him a whole bunch. And when he comes, he's like really giving it his all. He's like one of the most entertaining things about the movie, but I feel like the narrative doesn't really, it really goes with how earnest the Maitlands are, and how it's like they have a kind of innocence about them that really drives the movie. And then you have their opponents, I guess, the Deets who move in, and how they just grouse against the Maitlands. They kind of rub the Maitlands the wrong way, and they're more like neighbors that don't get along. At least they don't get along at first, and then by the end of the movie, they find a way to coexist. On this watching the movie, I have a greater appreciation and an understanding for the story and the narrative and how it all plays out. Narratively speaking, this movie is very well put together. The story elements kind of flow like well-crafted puzzle pieces. I think it works much better than the sequel, Beetlejuice. In the sequel, there were some story elements that didn't quite fit in. It's almost like they were forcing certain aspects of the story to work together that didn't quite work. They sort of worked, but did not work as well as the story elements in the original movie. One of the first things that this movie opens with is the model that Alec Baldwin's character makes. It's a model of the entire town. So Adam, played by Alec, is basically inspecting his model town, and he sees a spider on this town, and he kind of gathers up the spider in his hand and throws it outside, frees it, puts it outside. I don't think he throws it outside. I think he just kind of puts it on the outside window so that the spider can go away. But that's quite brave of him. I couldn't do that. It's like, immediately when I saw that, I got the ick, because it's like, oh no, spiders touching your hand. It's like, I was like, are you sure that's safe? I couldn't. I don't know that if I could do that. It's like when it opens with a spider crawling on somebody's hand, it leaves quite an impression on you. So that was, it's almost like the movie opens up with a bang. We're starting off with spiders. In the movie, we learned that Adam and his wife, Barbara, they can't have children, or they've been trying to have children and have been unsuccessful. and they're on vacation at the time. So they're basically they're having a staycation. They want to stay at home and luxuriate in their home and try not to be bothered by anyone. And this lends to the later parts of the movie when they meet Lydia. They're killed very early in the movie, very early on. They're killed by Benji. It's like, well, it's a dog that kind of looks like the same dog breed as Benji, which was a dog that was very popular when I was growing up. There was a few dogs that were incredibly popular when I was growing up. One was Lassie, and she was a Irish setter. Benji, I'm not exactly what kind of dog Benji was. And Marmaduke, but I think Marmaduke was a cartoon dog. There was Beethoven, was a giant Saint Bernard. So just a few celebrity dogs. There was Spuds McKenzie from the advertising campaign for, I think, Budweiser. I can't remember. One of those. There was a little Chihuahua from Taco Bell. But anyways, so this little is a little dog, a little hairy dog, and he's kind of like wandering the streets and whatnot. And the Maitlands are on their way home. They have to cross a covered bridge. And when they get to the bridge, they see this dog. They try to swerve to avoid the dog. And they end up crashing through part of the covered bridge. And their car is half out on the halfway on the bridge and half off the bridge. And supernaturally, the dog is standing on a piece of wood, perfectly balanced, or balancing the car to keep the car from falling off into the water below. The dog steps off the piece of wood and the car goes crashing down and kills the Maitlands. At first, the Maitlands don't know they're dead. They walk all the way back home. And it's when they get home, they realize that, there's stuff that's happening. Like they're catching on fire, strangely. Well, they're starting fires without actually, starting fires. And then, they can't see the reflection in the mirror. They quickly discover that they're dead. But they try to carry on with their lives as if they were alive. And then somebody buys their house. And that's when all of the, hijinks ensues. What's really interesting is that very on in the movie, you get a tease of Beetlejuice. And you don't see him, but you kind of see the back of his head. And he's looking at the newspaper. And one of the gags they have is that there's the newspaper he's looking at is called The Afterlife, and he switches to the obituaries, and he calls the obituaries the visitor section. So I thought that was funny. And in the visitor section or the obituary, that's where he noticed that the Maitlands are newly dead. And he marks them as marks. He thinks that the Maitlands is going to be his next marks. And it turns out that he's correct. The other thing that the Maitlands discovered that tells them that they're dead is that once they get back in the house, they can't leave the house again. Whenever they try to leave the house, they open up into a deserted world that's unlike what the outside of there look like. And then they step out into this desert world, and there's a giant sandworm that tries to come and eat them. And so they always have to quickly run back into their house so they're not eaten by the sandworm. One of my favorite parts of the movie is when the Deets arrive. With the Deets' arrival, there's a lot of chaos, and the Maitlands are immediately off-put by it because in the first place, even though they're dead, they still consider this their house, but they don't have any control over what happens at the house after they die. And I don't think they actually considered it. What had been happening is that they had a real estate agent that had been trying to get them to sell their house. And they've been rebuffing this real estate agent, but since they died, the real estate agent was free to sell their house. And their house is sold to the Deets. And so the Deets come in, and Mrs. Deets is immediately off put by the way the house looked. She's an artist, and the house is old fashioned and it doesn't fit her aesthetic. And she immediately imagines what she needed to do to make this house livable for her. Her husband, Charles Dietz, is perfectly fine with the house. He doesn't want to change anything. Moving to this house was his idea. They're from New York, but he wanted to move his family to the country. He wanted that fresh country aesthetic, basically. The fresh air, the greenery, the quietness, the fact that life is a little bit slowed down. It's everything that he ever wanted. And this is not Delia Dietz vibe. She's not feeling it at all. So they come in, they have a lot of commotion, and Delia is talking about all of the changes that need to be made. And this is one of the things that's very off-putting to the Maitlands. Like, they don't like her intentions. At first, they don't even like the Dietz being in the house, and they also don't like Delia's intentions. And one of those things that she needs to do to make the house palatable to herself is that she needs to completely remodel the house. She's talking about knocking down walls and doing some remodeling of the exterior of the house. She wants to make it an art exhibit. It's not enough to have a place where you can live. She wants to make her house an art piece. And one of the things that they can't do right away is they can't go up into the attic right away. That's where the Maitlands are staying at, to basically keep out of sight from the Maitlands. It's not necessarily to keep out of sight because the Maitlands can't see them anyway, but just to have a little place for themselves in their own house. One place where the Dietz can't go in and start changing anything is in the attic. Since they don't immediately have access to the attic. And one of the things that Mrs. Dietz does is, like I said, she changes the exterior of the house, and it indeed looks like an art exhibit. But I have to confess, I kind of like it. I like what she did to the house. I like the exterior of the house goes from being like a traditional looking exterior to like, it would be like a postmodern redesign of the exterior. And it's kind of hard to describe, but I really enjoyed that house. It's a confession of mine, a guilty pleasure. I would live in that house with the exterior the way she had redesigned it. I actually really liked it. I'm not sure if it's meant to be outlandish or if it's meant to be off-putting, but I did not find it off-putting. I actually liked it. I wonder who else liked it. Am I the only one? Did you like it as well? Let me know. Adam and Barbara try haunting the Dietz. It doesn't work. The problem is that not everybody who's alive can see ghosts. And they're trying to scare the parents. They're not trying to scare Lydia. They actually kind of like Lydia. And that's because she's a child and they've always wanted children. And she's actually kind of nice and she enjoys being there. But they don't like the parents. So they're really trying to scare the parents. But the parents can't see them. And so all of the scare tactics that they're doing, all the body morphing, the body horror that they try to do doesn't work because they can't be seen. Later on, they discover that Lydia can see them, but she's the only one who can see them. Another favorite part that I have is the afterlife bureaucracy. That is a very different take on what I've seen before in other movies regarding the afterlife. They go there, they have a book, an instruction manual for being dead, and they're trying to read the book, but the book is very difficult to understand and to piece together. It's hard to read. And then they do the thing where they're not actually reading the book from beginning to end. They're reading it like in bits and pieces, going back and forth, trying to figure out how to exist as a ghost. And they can't really figure it out. It's difficult to make heads or tails of this. It reads like, I think it's described as that it reads as stereo instructions. But one of the things they figure out is how to get to the afterlife itself, like get from their home to the afterlife space. And so they figure that out. They go to the afterlife, and it's filled with bureaucracy. It's like the DMV for dead people. And they have to take a number, and there are a bunch of dead people kind of waiting around, and the dead people basically look like when they were killed. Like if they were eaten by a shark, then there's a guy that has a shark like nibbling on him. Or if they hang themselves, then there's a person that's hanging that's like floating around during part of the bureaucracy, or whatever it is that killed them. That's the state that they're in when they're in the afterlife, when they're in this bureaucratic space. One of the things that is noted that the Maitlands don't actually look like they've had a lot of trauma. Like the other ghosts have serious trauma attached to them, but the Maitlands look relatively normal. Like they're not soaking wet. They're not bloated or blue. They don't look like a person looks like after they've been drowned. And the decision had been made earlier in the process that keeping the stars wet all the time, like keeping Baldwin and Geena Davis wet all the time, that it felt like that was a little too much. It would be too cumbersome for the actors to have to deal with. So they just decided to keep them normal. And I think it kind of helps connect the audience to the ghosts in the film. We're supposed to be sympathetic to the Maitlands. So they kept the Maitlands relatively normal. So just the aesthetic and the goings on of the afterlife bureaucracy was very entertaining. They find their caseworker, Juno. Juno is kind of delightful. She tries to give them the rundown of what they have to do in order to exist in the afterlife, and she's encouraging them to scare off the Maitlands themselves. They get a clue about Beetlejuice, about how to, about the bio exterminator. And Juno tells them not to bother with him. It's like, he can't be trusted. Don't mess with Beetlejuice. You should do this yourselves. So they try, but it doesn't really work. Actually, one of the things that I really liked is that they actually, because the first time they understand that Beetlejuice exists, one of them finds one of his business cards, and that's why they talk to their caseworker. And that's when the caseworker tells them, don't bother with Beetlejuice. And they get back into their their attic in their house. That's where they're staying at. The Maitlands have a run-in with Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is kind of living in the model of the town. The first meeting with Beetlejuice was fun. It was like, because Beetlejuice himself is like, even though like the movie is named after him, it still feels like he's stealing the scene. He's loud, he's bombastic, he's exciting, he's constantly moving, he's incredibly funny. He's just an amazing character. And that's why we came to see the movie. We came to the movie to see Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice. This is back when Michael Keaton was mainly known as a comedic actor. I think it's before he did any of his dramatic roles. And some of his earlier roles were like rom-coms or just straight out comedies like Mr. Mom or some of those other movies. And I known him as a stand-up comedian. I remember seeing some of his stand-up on television. And that was my frame of reference for him. So seeing him as this character was very exciting. The meeting with Beetlejuice doesn't go well for Beetlejuice, right? It's like the Maitlands decide that they decide that he's entirely too scary, because they don't want to harm the Maitlands. They just want to get the Maitlands out of their house. And they especially don't want any harm to come to Lydia. They don't want anything to happen to Lydia. They just want the people out of the house, but they think that Beetlejuice's methods might be too extreme. They decide to reject Beetlejuice's offer of assistance, and they try to scare the Maitlands themselves. And the best efforts they did was, apparently they find out how to possess people, or how to I don't even know how to do an extreme psychic incursion, I guess you would call it. So they start to possess the Maitlands and get them to do the Deo dance. And that's when they have the Maitlands are together with some guests and they start playing Deo and they start possessing the people to sing like a Deo dance from the song. And it's funny. It's one of the best parts of the movies. It's super enjoyable. It accidentally turns the movie Beetlejuice into a musical, but unfortunately it doesn't work. It's like, yes, the people are possessed and yes, they're forced to do things that, they didn't like. You got their shrimp that they're trying to eat comes up and the shrimp doesn't actually attacks them, but it kind of mushes them in the face. And all of these things that have happened that are designed to scare the Maitlands, because the Maitlands, I mean, not designed to scare the Maitlands, the Maitlands are trying to scare the Deets and their guests. And while the whole possession is spectacular, it doesn't really work because the Deets and their guests actually enjoyed it. And they find out that Lydia actually knows the ghosts and they encourage Lydia to get the ghosts to come down to negotiate because they figure that, this would be great for house parties, having these ghosts. They can actually charge for people to be entertained by the ghosts and make some money off of it. But Lydia has to tell them they weren't trying to entertain you. They were trying to scare you. They're trying to scare us out of the house. The Deets are like, no, we're going to try to make some money off of this. They're going to try to take advantage of the Maitlands. I think it's about this time that's when Beetlejuice attacks. I'm not exactly sure how he gets out. I'm not exactly sure I'm not exactly sure who calls him, but Beetlejuice decides to give them a free sample of what he's capable of. So he gets out and he basically scares the Maitlands in the form of a giant snake. And he's vicious. He's scary. He's a snake with Beetlejuice head and sharp teeth. He's throwing people around. He's hurting people. He threatens Lydia. When Barbara Maitland sees all this and she sees what's all going on, she's kind of horrified. So she calls Beetlejuice back away from the possession. When she calls him back, when she calls his name 3 times, he ends up back in the model. He's trapped in a model. And he's upset because, he was just getting started. He was just having fun. But the Maitlands didn't like how vicious he was and that he could have hurt Lydia. Another one of my favorite parts is when Beetlejuice meets Lydia for the first time. And she happens to, I think the Maitlands had gone to the underworld to get some more help. And while they were gone, Lydia goes into the attic because she finds a way to get into the attic. Of course she would. And she sees the model that the Maitland had built. And that's when she meets Beetlejuice, who's trapped in the model. Beetlejuice tries to negotiate with Lydia and he's trying to get her to say his name so that he can go out and, just start scaring everybody again. And Lydia starts to say it, and then she realizes that Beetlejuice was the same snake demon that had scared them before. And then and she feels the same way as the Maitlands feel. It was like his method of scaring her and her family was a little too extreme. So she doesn't say his name a third time, and she decides she doesn't want to deal with Beetlejuice. But that was a funny meeting that Beetlejuice had with her. Pretty much every time Beetlejuice comes into the screen, the movie it's like enhanced entertainment. Meanwhile, the Deets have decided that they're going to basically force the Maitlands to entertain their guests. One of the things that happened was that Charles Deets wants to do a deal with someone he's worked with called Maxie Dean. I think they're all in real estate together. And he wants to develop the town that they're in. Charles Dietz wants to develop the town that they had moved to. He wants to, buy up some of the property in the town, and he wants to really build it up. And he calls his associate Maxie Dean, and he wants to get Maxie Dean's backing. He wants some financial support in order to help develop the town. But Maxie is skeptical. He doesn't want to deal with it. He basically tells Charles Dietz that he's kind of a loser, and that's why he moved out to the town in the first place. He couldn't hack it in New York, and that's why he moved out. And Maxie doesn't want anything to do with him. But now that the Dietz have these ghosts, they have an in with Maxie Dean because Maxie's wife is really into ghosts and stuff. So they use that as a lure to get Maxie to bring his wife to their house. And it's like, when they get Maxie Dean and his wife in the house, then they can convince Maxie to, lend the financial backing that they would need to develop the town. And they would use the Maitlands as as the hook to get people to visit the town and to develop the town. They were determined to use the Maitlands as kind of a entertainment center for the town. They would have these ghosts to perform tricks for the audience. And in order to get the Maitlands to show up, Ortho had found the Book of the Dead that belonged to the Maitlands. Lydia had gotten to the attic. They basically forced Lydia to open the attic. And one of the things they do is they bring the model of the town that was built by Adam downstairs that was going to make that a part of their seance. They also got the wedding paraphernalia from when the Maitlands got married. The Maitlands kept their wedding suit and the wedding dress, and Delia didn't throw the wedding stuff away, so they were going to use that as a personal possessions for Ortho to do the seance. And Ortho, he claims that he had been dabbling in supernatural stuff, so he knows how to do these types of things. And so now he's doing a seance to call forth the Maitlands. And so he's doing the seance, but the thing about it is that when he calls the Maitlands, they show up and they fill in the wedding dress, like Barbara fills in the wedding dress and Adam fills in his tuxedo. But when they fill up the wedding apparel, their spirits start to crumble. Like they appear young when they first show up, like as they died. But then it seems like their ghosts start to age in appearance, so that they start to crumble. And it's like he's killing the ghosts. And Ortho doesn't know what's going on. Or Ortho thought that he knew what he was doing. He thought that he was just calling the Maitlands, but he's destroying the Maitlands. It's like they're already dead. You can't kill what is dead, but you can eradicate ghosts. And that's what Ortho was doing. And he didn't realize he was doing, and he didn't know how to stop it. So Lydia's word, she doesn't want anything bad to happen to the Maitlands. So she runs up she runs over to the model because they brought the model downstairs, and she calls out Beetlejuice, and Beetlejuice comes to, she makes a deal for Beetlejuice to save the Maitlands. And Beetlejuice says, well, in order for me to do what you asked, I'm going to have to marry you. I don't make the rules. And so Lydia agrees to this. She calls out Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice starts to scare the Maitlands. He starts to scare the Dietz and rescue the Maitlands. But the Maitlands didn't make this agreement. So they're trying to call his name to banish him back to the model. But Beetlejuice is fighting back. This is basically the final fight of the movie. And it's just funny how they're fighting Beetlejuice. And then at the same time, Beetlejuice is preparing to marry Lydia. He makes himself a tuxedo. He makes himself a red tuxedo. He makes a red wedding dress for Lydia. And then he calls a ghost preacher from the underworld to marry them. And he traps the Deets as witnesses. And he prepares to marry Lydia. I think by marrying Lydia, he could stay in the world of the living permanently. I think that's the purpose of the marriage. And the Maitlands are trying to interfere, but it's like he slaps their mouths closed with metal and zippers to prevent them from saying his name. And then finally he banishes them somewhere. I forgot where he banishes Adam to, but he banishes Barbara outside of the house, and now she has to deal with the sandworm. But at the end of the movie, they get rid of Beetlejuice because Barbara comes crashing into the house, riding on the sandworm, and the sandworm swallows Beetlejuice. And that was, I don't know how she was able to ride the sandworm, but that was amazing. So that's basically how they got rid of Beetlejuice. And then it was after this adventure that the Maitlands and the Deets, they decided to make up and find a way to live together, because the Maitlands can't really get rid of the Deets, and the Deets realized that they didn't want to harm the Maitlands. They didn't want to. I think it's like they even though the Maitlands are dead and they're not human, they recognize the humanity in the Maitlands, and so they decided they didn't want to use them as circus acts. And in the new arrangements, you see Charles Deese, he's reading a book called The Living and the Dead, Harmonious Lifestyles and Peaceful Coexistence. And Charles Deese complains that it reads like stereo instructions, just like, because it's by the same authors who wrote the Book of the Dead that the Maitlands owned. So this is, the Maitlands have gotten a hold of how to be ghosts. They're more adept at their ghostly powers than ever before. And they've taken to helping raise Lydia, and she's not great at school, so they're tutoring her and they're working with her on her grades, and they're happy when she's successful. And they ask her about her grades when she gets home from school one day, and she says even though she got a C in one of her other subjects, I think it was science or whatever, I can't remember, she got an A in math. So since she got an A in math, they're celebrating by possessing her with the song Jump the Line, Shake Senora, and everybody's dancing and happy, and everybody's getting along at the Deets residence. Meanwhile, Beetlejuice is back at the bureaucracy. Apparently the sandworm didn't actually kill him, but for some reason he's in the waiting room of the bureaucracy. This is the last gag of the movie, and another one of my favorite parts. And he holds out his number. He had to get a number. The counter is on number 3. His number is 9,998,383,750. And the guy next to him is a witch doctor, and his number is 4. So the witch doctor is next. So he does some shenanigans and he switches his number with the witch doctor's number. So now the witch doctor is number 9 trillion and Beetlejuice has the number 4. And he says, "Ooh, look, so I'm up next." And the witch doctor looks down and he knows that he wasn't 9 trillion. But instead of actually complaining about it, he reaches into his powder and sprinkles the powder over Beetlejuice's head. And he shrinks Beetlejuice's head down to the size of a bean. And that was the last gag of the movie. And that was funny. And one of the other, I had went over the themes earlier, but one of the other themes is read your instruction manual. You get an instruction manual or you get like an employee manual for your new job. Read it. Read that joint. They got some important information so you don't trip up. You're not walking around talking about, well, I didn't know that. Well, the reason that you didn't know that is because you didn't read your instruction manual. So if you get an instruction manual or an employee manual, read your damn manual. That's what it's there for. And this is as much for me as it is for you, because oftentimes I get like new electronics or stuff, and I'm not always reading the instruction manual. I only look for the instruction manual when I get into trouble. Like, how do I set this watch? How do I turn this alarm off? How do I get my phone to do this, that, and the other? And I would know that had I read the instruction manual. So yeah, do that. And that's very important. One of the main themes of the movie, because running throughout the movie is the Maitlands not really reading their Book of the Dead instruction manual. And they would have saved themselves a lot of consternation had they, instead of asking how to get rid of people in their house, maybe ask, how do I read this instruction manual? So that is, I think that's another one of the main themes of the movie. So now that we've talked about some of our favorite parts, and those admittedly are my favorite parts, but if you have some favorite parts, let me know what some of your favorite parts of the movie were. I'm sure I skipped over it. Let's go and talk about the trivia top 10. This is the top 10 trivia that I found on IMDb. And it seems as though Michael Keaton came up with much of the character's look himself. Keaton told the makeup department he wanted mold on his face and his hair looking as if he stuck his finger in an electric socket. And he requested that the wardrobe department send him clothes from all different time periods. And you notice that in the movie, Beetlejuice goes through a number of costume changes. Like you expect the costume or the suit on the poster to be the only things he's dressed in, but he's only dressed in that for like a minute. Most of the time he's in different costumes, and he's constantly changing costumes. So that was part of the delight of Beetlejuice. This is Michael Keaton's favorite film of his own, and he ad-libbed a lot of his lines. I don't know when this assertion was made that this was his favorite film. I mean, it could have been, he might have a new favorite film. The Founder could be his favorite film, or Birdman could be his favorite film. So, because I'm not exactly sure when this notion was captured. But at the very least, this is one of his favorite films. And it should be. The studio originally wanted to call the film House Ghost. As a joke, Jim Burton suggested the name Scared Sheetless and was horrified when the studio actually considered using it. And I'm glad they didn't. I'm not sure if I would have watched this movie if it was called Scared Sheetless. Director Tim Burton feared that the Deo sequence wouldn't go over well, since in his opinion, it wasn't very funny. Burton turned out to be wrong. Audiences loved it and think it was one of the most iconic scenes, and it was. According to Michael Keaton, the Beetlejuice character was described to him by Tim Burton as having lived an entire time period, but no time period. Keaton used this as the jumping off point to create the character with such features as a shock hairdo, mode makeup, and large teeth. He said that when he first showed up to the set as Beetlejuice, the crowd was chanting, "Juice, juice, juice." This got Keaton excited for his role. The film was the first DVD sent out by Netflix in 1988. That's an exciting bit of trivia, because this calls back all the way back to the time when Netflix was just sending out DVDs through the mail. There was no streaming service. Maybe there was, I don't even think there was YouTube. There was like nothing. And the main competitor was Blockbuster. And the thing about Blockbuster was you had to physically go to the store, check out your DVD, or I think they even still had cassette tapes. Not cassette tapes, what am I saying? VHS tapes at the time. They had both. You had to physically go to the store, pick up those things, go home, watch the movie in your allotted time, and then physically take the the items back to the store. And it's relatively easy because Blockbusters were everywhere. So you would usually pick up the movie on your way home from work. And then you could return the movie on your way back to work because they had a slot where you can slide them in. The slot was open 24 hours so that you wouldn't pick up those pesky late fees. But with Netflix, I don't think the late fees were all that horrendous as they were on Netflix. And then, I mean, on Netflix, the late fees weren't as horrendous as on Blockbuster. Because Blockbusters, you could have a late fee on one DVD that's worth 10 DVDs. Like you could have $100 late fee on a DVD that costs $25. But I think with Netflix, if you have the film for more than a certain amount of time, you bought that film. It's like, because they weren't trying to milk you like Blockbuster was. You would go on a computer, choose your DVDs, you would get them in the mail, and you would mail them back. It was much less arduous. And I remember doing that. I was doubtful at first, and I remember doing that, and I was like, "Oh, this is fun. This is a fun thing to do." And then Netflix transitioned to a streaming service, and the rest is history. They've only recently, I think within the last 2 years, canceled their mail-in DVD service. In the next bit of trivia, Catherine O'Hara met her future husband, production designer Bo Welsh, on making this film. According to Welsh, Tim Burton said he would ask her out near the end of filming. It didn't even occur to me that I was even supposed to talk to actors, but since Tim told me to, I did, and then we dated and we're married, and here we are today. And I checked, and it seems like they're still married. So they're a very successful meeting on a movie set. The idea for the movie came after Poltergeist from 1982 was a hit movie, but the idea of bad ghosts was flipped. The people who moved into the house would be the designated villains. So it's Poltergeist, except the people haunting the house are the living people. The original plan for the dinner party was to have the guests dance to a song by the Ink Spots, but Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara suggested the music be calypso, and thus we have Deo. The visual effects budget was just $1 million, a major factor in Tim Burton's deciding to make the effects look as tacky and B-movie as possible. And that's why the effects look that way. It's like the effects could have been better, but it was purposely designed to look the way it looks because Tim Burton had a certain aesthetic that he wanted to fulfill for this movie. And in the sequel, Beetlejuice, they maintained that aesthetic. The sandworm still looks like in the Beetlejuice, they have sandworms, and they still look like claymation models. They still got a lot of cheesy practical effects, and it works. They kept what I really like about Beetlejuice is they kept what worked in Beetlejuice, and that's fantastic. And now that we've gone over the trivia, let's talk about what the critics thought. The critics have this movie 83%, and the audience score is 82%. On Rotten Tomatoes. On IMDb reviews, it's at 7.4 out of 10. Jana Manji from Age of the Geek wrote, "What's more frightening than being dead? Being slogged down by bureaucracy and forced to read a handbook, or facing the lecturous mayhem of a bioexorcist. This is a fun and quirky look at death and the problems of the recently deceased. And I agree. I think that is exactly how I feel." Eddie Harrison from filmauthority.com wrote, "At least it's short and doesn't overstay its welcome, and it's full of cheaply realized but undeniable visual and imagination. It's just that Beetlejuice seedy game show host frat boy humor looks fairly dubious in 2024. And this I thoroughly disagree with. I just watched the film and it's 2025 and it looks fantastic because it's done on purpose. It's done with intention. And that's one of the things I really like about this. Sebastian Zavala Khan from Me Gusta El Cine wrote, "The film still works and is just as charming and engaging as it was when I watched it as a kid. Michael Keaton is iconic, and Winona, Baldwin, Davis, and O'Hara all excel in their roles. The less said about Jeffrey Jones, the better." And that I find is appropriate. Dennis King from Tulsa World wrote, "Ultimately, the special effects and wacky premise weighed down the story and turned the movie into something akin to an overlong carnival ride." Nah, I'm not feeling that. I'm not feeling that comment. Finally, Beetlejuice, as of this recording, is available on HBO Max, Hulu, Disney, and Amazon Prime. Now that we've got our jollies on, and we're firmly in scary season, I wanted to revisit a horror movie that I genuinely liked and didn't have to be dragged in to see it. That movie is Prophecy with Christopher Walken. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Instagram, and sometimes Twitter. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at fanmail@backlookcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. One last time, if you like this show, then please help us grow by spreading the word of Backlook Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.